I'm Kristen. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my wrap up for the month of July. It was actually kind of a crappy reading month. I did read 9 books, but I just wasn't really into most of them. I definitely noticed that I was feeling really reading slumpy after finishing the Olympics readathon in June, and I kept looking for books like that would just be fun and enjoyable. So I read a lot of fantasy romance and I just kind of thought they were all meh. I'm also obviously not in my living room in Denmark. I am back home in Canada for a little bit and at my family's cottage. So my location for the next month of videos might be rather varied. This month I have split up the wrap up or the books into different categories. But we'll get started with the July statistics. So I read 9 books in July. I bought 1 ebook. I read 2 books using Scribd. The other 6 then were library books. And I listened to 1 book on audio. We're gonna jump right into the various categories. So the first category is missed opportunities. And for that one, I'm gonna start with The Space Between Worlds by Messiah Johnson. This is a sci-fi speculative lit book following a character who works for a company that sends people to various parallel universes. However, you can only travel to a universe in which you have already died, or your version of you in that world has already died, and our main character has died in almost all of the known parallel universes. I did this as a buddy read with Elizabeth from the channel Reading Riley, and I actually really enjoyed the buddy reading experience, and I did really enjoy this book. It was a lot less mystery and thriller than I think I had been led to believe by other reviewers, and it was surprisingly introspective. I really thought that the writing was very thoughtful. One of the characters, or our main character, goes on a little bit of an existential crisis in the middle of the book, and the way that it was written really made me go through that process with the main character. It was so much about who you are and how your life experiences and choices have shaped you, but also then being confronted with the possibilities of other existences, like the other potential ways in which you could have experienced life, or the other ways that you could have been. So all of that I actually really liked, and the missed opportunity here I think was the final part. It just sort of felt like it was building up to something really intense, and that showdown wrapped up really quickly. It was very anticlimactic. I remember thinking going into the very last chapter that there were only, on the ebook, only 20 pages left, and I had no idea how all of the different storylines or all the things that were going on were going to get wrapped up in those 20 pages, and they did, and it was kind of like a little bit too easy. So while the ending was a bit of a letdown compared to where I thought it was going and the build up from the rest of the book, I did actually quite enjoy this book, and I would read more by this author and more in this genre. The other book I have lumped into the missed opportunities category is Cast in Firelight by Dana Swift. And this one I did not enjoy so much. This is a young adult fantasy, and it is featuring a witch and a wizard in a political marriage alliance. I thought that the plot was pretty obscure and didn't always make sense a lot of the times, or it jumped from thing to thing without having an obvious connection. This is a personal preference, obviously, but it does read a lot on the younger side of young adult. But really what let me down was the obscure plot connections, the lack of detail either in the descriptive surroundings or just how things related to each other. I was never very clear. I thought that there was a lot of stuff missing, a lot of information missing on how things or people connected to each other. There were some quite convenient things that happened, and the biggest one is the relationship dynamic between the main characters. It had the potential to be a really great hate to love that I think a lot of people would really enjoy, and the way that it is done, which has to do with a misunderstanding of who each other are, it was quite disappointing, and I think a big missed opportunity. So ultimately, I just really did not enjoy almost anything about the book. The relationship was cute, but I think it would have been a lot better as a tense, rivalry fraught hate to love a la Carden and Jude, and it wasn't. Okay, the next category that I have the books divvied up into is relationships that seemingly come out of nowhere. The first book in this category is The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Adia. This is a fantasy romance retelling of The 1001 Nights, where the emperor or ruler of this world basically marries a new girl every day and has her killed the next morning. But her goal is to keep telling him a story throughout the course of the night that makes him curious enough to let her live for another day. And of course it is a fantasy romance, so you are expecting for them to fall in love with each other. And that does happen, but when you're reading it, it kind of just comes out of nowhere. Like, I thought it was quite unfounded, where the only thing that was really seemed to connect them was just sort of their both being drawn to each other. And that's it. I thought that the world was really interesting, and the reason for why he is killing a different girl or woman every evening or like every morning after marrying them was actually really interesting. I was really intrigued about why that was happening. There's like a prologue that sort of sets that up. This is a fade to black or like not descriptive fantasy romance, so it is quite clean if you're interested in that. And it's not like the relationship wasn't interesting or wasn't possible. I do think that there was a way to have written this so that you could see how it came about, but there wasn't enough between the two of them. It was just sort of like that, like they're super attracted to each other and like mysteriously drawn to each other. And that does not a loving relationship make. I don't know that I will be finishing the rest of this series. The other two books that are in the relationships that came out of nowhere category is Fortuna Sworn and the sequel to that, Restless, Slumber by KJ Sutton. I was really excited about this book. I've had it on my TBR, like saved on script, for a really long time. So in the first book, Fortuna Sworn, our main character, Fortuna, is a nightmare, which is sort of a paranormal mythological being who can, with physical touch to someone else, sense all of their fears and then create a nightmare to terrorize them, and sometimes to the point of like frightened to death. And her brother has been missing for 2 years, and she runs into a fairy who strikes a deal with her to marry him, and he will give her information about where her brother is. I thought that the first book was fine. Like, I enjoyed the interactions between the two characters. It sort of took the mating bond or like the soulmate thing in a different direction. It was actually after they got married that created, because he was fae, that created a bond between them. So it was a different style of mating bond sort of than I was used to, and I appreciated that difference. That's like something new, because you could see how her general thoughts and feelings were of him were being confused by the fact that she could sort of sense and feel him, and they had this almost Feyre and Rhys style sensing each other's thoughts connection, where it actually almost felt like a combination between the first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, and the second book in that series, A Court of Mist and Fury. It felt like a mashup, a slightly lesser version of those two books. So while I appreciated the fact that the mating bond wasn't just like this soulmate thing, and that it was actually created by their marriage and established, it still was like, well, they're not actually into each other. It almost felt like their relationship was being created by the fact that they were married. Even though I wasn't super into or satisfied with the first book, I did end up picking up the next book, Restless, Slumber. And again, just like more relationships that seemed to come out of nowhere. This one was, plot-wise, all over the place. And so it was just sort of a little bit chaotic. But what really bugged me about Restless Slumber, like to the point of livid, shocked anger, was the ending. There's some choices that are made at the ending that I just actually like jaw dropped reading, just staring at the page, like confounded at what was happening, and knowing that it was going to go in a certain direction. I'm getting ahead of myself. So Fortuna develops this friendship with someone in the first book, and he has a very particular personality in the first book. She discovers something about him at the very end of the first book, and suddenly in the second book, Restless Slumber, his character and personality are completely different. There is no sexual tension or interest whatsoever in the first book, and in the second book, suddenly it's being implied constantly that he's into her. She's constantly also thinking about how attractive he is, and there's like flirty whatever with him too, and it was just out of nowhere. And I just have an idea of where the next book is going from the romance relationship perspective, and I'm not happy about it. I was quite livid when I finished this book, and I do not know that I will pick up the next book. Okay, the next category of books that I read in July is fun, but not a favorite. And the first book in that is going to be Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. I read this book not as a buddy read, but I got my nephew a copy of, or actually a box set of the whole series, and I told him that I would read the first book with him. It took me over a month to get a copy from my library in Denmark, but I finally did in July and I read it. I thought it was really cute. I can totally see why this is such a popular middle grade book. I actually haven't read any middle grade since the first few Harry Potter books, so it was interesting getting back into that level of plot difficulty or the complications sort of the story, and how obviously the sort of like twists and surprises I was able to guess just from being a more mature reader or someone who has also read a lot of books. You can sort of see the patterns and where things are going. I am looking forward to talking to my nephew about this. He is going to actually reread it because he read it way back when his birthday was, when I first got him the series. So this was fun, but again, like Percy Jackson is not suddenly going to become an all-time favorite of mine. And then also in this category, fun but not a favorite, is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett Sinclair. This is another fantasy romance, and it is a sort of urban Greek mythology retelling of Hades and Persephone. This is the book that I listened to as an audiobook. I actually really liked the modernization retelling of how Hades and Persephone came to be. I thought that the author's interpretation of this modern world was really interesting. In this dynamic, you assume that Hades is going to be the more toxic male love interest, and I actually think it was the reverse. I found Persephone quite annoying at a lot of times throughout this book. She was like extremely quick to judge, particularly with Hades, and almost like she would make a quick judgment and then put up blinders and refuse to have any sort of reasonable communication or trying to understand things in another way. So there were some aspects of her personality and the way that she was approaching this relationship with Hades, or like their interactions, that was rather difficult for me to empathize with. Although there were other aspects of her life and her personality and like what she was dealing with that were quite sympathetic. Like, for example, the really, really complicated and I would say abusive relationship that she has with her mother, and how that has shaped or influenced her thought processes and the way that she perceives herself sometimes. Spice level here, I would say, is a medium, and I would describe it as more quantity over quality. I thought this was fun. I enjoyed it, but again, I just haven't been all that interested or over the moon about most of what I read in July, and I think that if I had read this at another time, maybe I would have been more into it. I read the synopsis for the second one, and I have a pretty strong guess of where it's going. And the final category is slow burn. First book in this category is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the first book in a new fantasy series. Actually, I think it is being described as a trilogy, so we know how many books it's going to be going into it. This is my first John Gwynne book, and let me tell you, I am interested in reading more. I'm describing this as slow burn because it did really take me a fair bit of time to get into it. I did read it more towards the beginning of the month when I was feeling rather slumpy, but at a certain point, I was so excited about this, and by the time that I finished the book, I was so into it and so excited. Like, the ending in this book is so fabulous. It makes me so excited to see where the rest of this series is going. But I do think that this book is going to suffer a lot from being set up for the rest of the series. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is a plot to this book. There are things that happen that you are interested in, that you will get excited about. But at the same time, it does feel a lot like world building, getting a sense of the characters, getting a sense of the world and the potential problems within this world, so that we have a better, or like a really, really good foundation for the rest of the series. In this book, we follow three main characters: a retired female warrior who has gone the family route. There is another female warrior who is actively in like a warrior band. And there is a final male character who is a escaped slave who gets taken up into actually the Bloodsworn, I'm pretty sure, like mercenary band. This is very Vikings inspired, but it's sort of like Vikings meets mercenaries. So there is stuff going on in each of these three stories. You're not quite sure how they all connect, but it does get there. While I probably didn't need to know what weapon every single character had on their body at any given time throughout the book, I thought the world building was amazing. I did hear a lot about, as I said, what weapons everyone is wearing, what clothing they are wearing, and what food they are eating. However, and so while I rolled my eyes a little bit at this, sometimes it actually did really build into the sense of this world. World building is not something that I always think to talk about or pay attention to, but lately I have really been noticing books when they don't have good world building, and I think that is making me all the more observant about books that have really good world building, where you do have such a clear picture of the world and what is happening, and an understanding of the lives of the characters and how they have been shaped. So that's something that I hope that I continue to be observant of and acknowledge when books and authors do it so well, like what was done in this book. So slow burn for me on this one. I was not hooked right away. It took me a significant, I think, portion of the book, but oh man, like it got me. I am so excited for this series. And all the more interested in reading other John Gwynne books now. And the final book that I also have in the slow burn category is Her Wicked Marquess by Stacey Reid, which is a historical romance. This is a book in the Sinful Wallflower series where the main character is a sort of self-declared wallflower. Her parents are trying to set up a marriage with her for a much older, horrible man, and so she decides, in order to avoid this marriage, she's going to ruin her reputation. She arranges to be overheard telling a friend that the rake, Lord Rothbury, or Nicholas, snuck into her room and stole a kiss. Nicholas hears about this, thinks it's kind of interesting and hilarious, and actually does sneak into her room, and the two start an adorable friendship that is also quite heated. The romance isn't exactly slow burn, but the events, let's say, in the relationship are really slowly drawn out over time. And watching the two of them go from having this sort of like awesome banter to where they wind up is just so lovely. I thought this was such a good book. The romance was really great. It was quite steamy, and it had actually a really good sort of other side plot, which was this revenge storyline that Nicholas, or Lord Rothbury, is involved in that is very Count of Monte Cristo vibes. I thought the main character was kind of awesome. She was strong, she was independent, and she was kind of a badass. I will definitely be reading other Stacey Reid books in the future when I am in the mood for more historical romance. Okay, well that is it for me today. July, as I said, was kind of hit and miss. There were a couple notable exceptions of books that I really enjoyed, but a lot of it I just wasn't really all that into. And I'm really hoping that my interest in books picks back up again. Did you participate in the Olympics readathon in June and also experience a bit of a reading slump in July? Let me know if there is a book that helped get you out of this reading slump. I need something to kickstart my reading here. I will see you next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.